Hello and welcome to Skyline's first episode tonight. I'm Driti Atri. Well, we begin with a question. What happens when a war officially ends, but nobody seems ready to trust the peace? Think about the headlines we are seeing today. 3 Indian sailors, they are dead. The US is refusing to apologize. Israel is rejecting a deal backed by its closest ally. Europe is preparing to lift sanctions on Iran. A cargo ship is attacked just hours after a ceasefire announcement. And global leaders, they are scrambling to convince everybody that peace is finally here. But is it? Or maybe is it simply a witnessing of beginning a new chapter in the same conflict? Because tonight's story, it is not just about America. It is about Iran. It is not just about Israel. It is about India, about Indian workers, Indian sailors, Indian businesses, Indian fuel prices, and India's future position in a rapidly changing world. So buckle up, because the whole West Asia may be thousands of kilometers away, but the consequences of what happens there, it could reach every Indian household tonight. So let's start with it. Can you imagine leaving your home for work, calling your parents before boarding a ship, promising your family that you will return soon, and then becoming a casualty in a conflict that you're not even part of? Well, that is the heartbreaking reality facing the families of 3 Indian sailors who were killed during a US military strike in the Strait of Hormuz. The men were not soldiers, they were not fighters, they were not part of any military operation. They were commercial seafarers, ordinary Indians doing ordinary jobs, trying to earn a living, trying to support their families. Yet, their lives ended in one of the world's most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints. And what has shocked many Indians, it is not only the attack itself, it is what happened afterwards, or rather, what did not happen afterwards. There was no apology, no public expression of regret, no acknowledgement that Indian lives had been lost. Now, the initial US statement focused on the military operation, but according to the reports, it made no mention of the Indian sailor who were killed there. Ladies and gentlemen, that silence, it has sparked outrage across India. Political leaders are demanding answers. Families are demanding justice, and ordinary citizens, they are simply asking a question. If India is America's strategic partner, then why were Indian lives treated as an afterthought? Well, here, Indian government has already launched the strongest protest ever. In fact, our foreign minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar, he personally raised the matter with the US Secretary of State, Mr. Marco Rubio. The message from New Delhi, it was clear. Commercial shipping cannot become collateral damage. Indian citizens cannot become invisible victims of somebody else's war. And in the meantime, grieving families continue to wait. They want answers, they want accountability, and most importantly, they want their loved ones to be brought back home. One father asked a question that has touched millions of Indians, by the way. What happened in my son's final moments? Think about that. A father is not asking for politics. He's not asking for diplomacy. He's asking for the truth. And right now, that truth, it only remains painful just to reach. But while India demands answers from Washington, another crisis is brewing inside America's closest ally in West Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel's National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he has responded to the proposed US-Iran agreement, and let me tell you, it is not good. His message was blunt, it was direct and impossible to ignore. Israel is not obligated to follow any agreement that it believes threatens its own security. Can you think about what that really means? The US may be celebrating peace. Iran may be celebrating sanction relief. European leaders may be celebrating diplomacy, but Israel is definitely signaling something very different. It is signaling caution, suspicion, and perhaps even resistance. Well, Ben-Gvir argued that Israel is an independent nation, a sovereign state, not a subordinate of Washington here, and therefore any deal that does not guarantee Israel's safety is a deal Israel may refuse to honor. The statement, it has created shockwaves across diplomatic circles, because peace agreements only work when the key planners or the players, they support them. If one major actor refuses to cooperate, the entire framework, that becomes vulnerable. And Israel has reasons for concern here. For years, Israeli leaders, they have viewed Iran's regional influence as one of their biggest security threat. Many fear that lifting sanctions it could strengthen Tehran economically and politically. Others worry that today's peace it could become tomorrow's problem. Result: a growing divide between Washington's diplomatic ambition and Israel's security calculation. And that particular divide, it could become one of the biggest obstacles to the long-term peace. But while Israel sees danger here, Europe sees opportunity, and that brings us to our next story. Now, for years, Iran lived under crushing sanctions. Its economy struggled, its currency suffered, its businesses faced restrictions, and its access to the international market, it became increasingly limited. Now imagine waking up one morning and learning that some of Europe's most powerful countries are preparing to lift those sanctions. That is exactly what reports suggest may happen. Germany, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom, four major European powers, all reportedly preparing to move towards sanction relief following the peace agreement. For Iran here, this could be one of the biggest diplomatic victories in years. Why? Because sanctions are not just political tools. They affect real lives. They affect jobs, they affect investment, trade, economic growth, and international confidence. If sanctions are lifted, Iran could gain greater access to global markets here. Foreign businesses may return, investors may return, trade relationship may expand, and billions of dollars could begin flowing through the economy again. Here, supporters of the agreement, they say this is exactly the point. They argue that economic integration creates stability, that countries with stronger trade ties are less likely to return to conflict. But critics remain skeptical here. They say sanctions should only be removed if Iran fully complies with its own commitments. And they also warn that verification will be very, very critical. Well, that is why the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, will likely play such an important role moving forward. Because trust alone, that's not enough. Verification matters, transparency matters, accountability matters. The world is now watching to see whether Iran follows through on its promises or not. But if it does not, because if it does, this could become one of the most significant diplomatic transformation of the decade. But just when peace seemed within reach, something happened in one of the world's most dangerous waterway. Can you imagine announcing a ceasefire, telling the world the fighting is ending, finally, convincing markets to calm down, convincing governments to relax, and then, just hours later, a cargo ship comes under an attack? Well, this is exactly why tensions have exploded again following reports of an attack near Aden. The timing, it could not have been worse, by the way. The world had barely begun discussing peace when headlines about a maritime attack it started appearing. Immediately, questions began flooding in. Was it an isolated incident? Was it a rogue operation? Was somebody trying to sabotage the peace process? Or is it the conflict that is far from over? The Red Sea and the Gulf region, that remains one of the most strategically important waterway on the planet Earth. Every day, massive amount of trade, it moves through these routes. Oil, gas, in fact, consumer goods, industrial supplies. The global economy depends on these shipping lanes, which means even a single attack, it can create ripple effect far beyond the whole West Asia. When investors become nervous, shipping costs rise, insurance premium increase, governments warning they increase, and suddenly a local incident becomes a global conflict. This is why analysts, they are watching every development so carefully. Because ceasefires are fragile. Sometimes they survive, sometimes they collapse, and sometimes, a single event changes everything. Well, the question now is whether this attack, it was merely an isolated incident or the first sign that peace, it may be far more fragile than leaders are willing to admit. And in the meantime, thousands of kilometers away, India and America, they are quietly preparing for a different battle altogether. A battle against China. While the world is focused on missiles, ceasefire, and peace agreement, another battle is quietly taking shape. Well, it is not being fought with tanks though. It is not being fought with fighter jets. It is being fought through supply chain, technology, and crucial minerals. That's right. Well, India and United States took a major step forward by launching the Critical Mineral Security Task Force. At first glance, it may sound technical, right? But make no mistakes here, this could become one of the most important economic partnership of the decade. Why? Because the future belongs to the countries that control critical minerals. Well, lithium, rare earth elements, battery material. These are the resources powering the electric vehicles, smartphones, renewable energy system, artificial intelligence infrastructure, and advanced military technology. So, whosoever controls these resources could help shape the whole global economy of the future. For years, China has dominated large part of the supply chain. From mining to processing to manufacturing, it is Beijing that has built an enormous advantage. Now, Washington and New Delhi, they want alternative. They want stronger and more resilient supply chain that does not depend on a single country. And that is why both the nations are bringing together businesses, investors, engineers, and policymakers. They are exploring everything from lithium refining and battery production to rare earth processing and recycling. The goal is simple here, by the way. Build a partnership that can compete with China's dominance and secure the technologies of future. Here for India, this is a huge opportunity. It means investment, it means jobs, it means manufacturing growth, and it means becoming a big player in a global technology race. Because the next great competition, it may not be about oil. It may be about minerals that power the modern world. But yes, while India and America strengthen economic ties, another country is being praised for helping end one of the world's most dangerous conflicts. Now, when people think about West Asia diplomacy, they usually think about Washington, Tehran, or Tel Aviv. But sometimes the biggest breakthrough, it happens very quietly, behind closed doors, far away from television cameras. And according to the Iranian officials, one country played a key role in helping reduce tension between the United States and Iran. Saudi Arabia. Yes, for years, Saudi and Iran, they were bitter rivals. They backed opposing sides in regional conflict. Their relationship was marked by suspicion, competition, confrontation. Many experts believe that meaningful cooperation between them, it was impossible. Yet today, we are hearing a very different story. Iran's foreign minister, Mr. Abbas Araghchi, he has reportedly praised Saudi Arabia's role in helping move diplomatic efforts forward. Well, he thanked Riyadh for supporting the process that eventually led to the agreement and emphasized the importance of regional cooperation. Can you think about how extraordinary that is? Just a few years ago, many would have considered such statements unimaginable. Today, the same countries are discussing stability, dialogue, and long-term security. Now, of course, challenges do remain, but trust does not return overnight. Old rivalries do not disappear because of just one agreement. But diplomacy is often about small steps, and every small step matters here. Many analysts believe that if Saudi Arabia and Iran can maintain regular communication, it could reduce tension across West Asia and lower the risk of future conflict. Well, the region has seen enough wars, enough destruction, enough instability. Now the question is whether leaders can transform today's diplomatic momentum into lasting peace or not. But yes, not everybody is impressed by this particular deal. And one former American president is openly questioning whether this agreement is really something new or not. Just when Mr. Trump, he appeared ready to celebrate a major diplomatic achievement, a very familiar voice, it entered the debate. Well, we are talking about Barack Obama. The former U.S. president has openly expressed skepticism about the new agreement. Now here, according to Mr. Obama, the proposed deal, it may not be significantly different from the nuclear agreement his own administration negotiated years ago. Wait, can you think about the irony here? Well, years ago, Mr. Trump criticized Mr. Obama's Iran deal and withdrew from it. Today, critics argue that Washington may be, moving back towards a framework that look very surprisingly familiar. Well, Mr. Obama's message, it was simple. Diplomacy may not solve every problem, but it is often better than war. In fact, he warned against the idea that countries can simply bomb their way to lasting solution. Instead, he argued that patient negotiations, in fact compromises and diplomacy, that remains essential tools in international relationship. Well, his comments have sparked fresh political debate in the United States. Supporters of Mr. Trump argue that the current deal is stronger and better structured. Critics argue that history is repeating itself. And this particular debate, it matters because foreign policy, it is rarely judged only by what happens today. It is judged by what happens years later from now. Well, will this particular agreement bring lasting stability, or will future leaders once again find themselves negotiating with Iran over the same issue again and again? Well, nobody knows the answer yet, but one thing is definitely clear. The debate over this agreement, that's far from over. And yes, while politicians argue about who deserves credit, millions of Indians are asking a much simpler question. How does this affect us? That's right, let's bring this story home, because while discussions about Iran, America and Israel, it may seem distant, the consequences could directly affect your daily lives. Well, think about fuel prices here. Every time you fill your car, in fact, every time a truck, it transports goods here and there, or maybe every time a flight takes off, who's affected here? Oil prices, they do matter for everybody. And India here imports more than 80% of its crude oil that it consumes. And that means any disruption in West Asia, it can quickly affect India's economy. Well, the good news is that the initial agreement between the United States and Iran, it has already started calming the market down. Oil prices have eased, concerns about supply disruption have reduced, and investors, they are breathing a little easier. And you know why this is important? Rather, this is very important because lower oil prices, it can reduce inflation. They can support the rupee, they can lower pressure on government finances, and they can make everyday goods slightly more affordable than it was before. There's also another important factor here, and that is Chebar port. Now, for years, India has invested in developing Chebar as a strategic gateway, just connecting India to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Sanctions and regional instability, it complicated those plans. But if relations improve here and restriction ease, India could gain new opportunities through the particular project. In short, this particular deal is not just about America and Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, this particular deal is about energy security, economic stability, trade route, investment opportunity, and India's long-term strategic interest. And that is why policymakers in New Delhi are watching every development so closely. Because what happens in Strait of Hormuz does not stay in Strait of Hormuz. It eventually reaches the fuel pumps, markets, businesses, and households across India. So tonight we followed a story that began with tragedy and ended with uncertainty. We talked about 3 Indian sailors who never returned home. We examined the growing anger in India over America's response. We looked at Israel's refusal to blindly accept a US-backed agreement. We explored Iran's diplomatic victory, and we explored Europe's changing approach. We discussed about fresh attacks that threatened fragile peace effort, and we saw India and America joining forces against China's supply chain dominance here. Let's be honest here, today's world is interconnected. No conflict remains local for long. A decision made in Washington can affect Mumbai. In fact, a missile fired near Hormuz, it could affect Delhi. A peace agreement signed in the whole West Asia, it can influence the fuel prices in every Indian city. And that is why these stories matters a lot. Thank you for joining me on Skyline. I'm Driti Atri. Stay focused, stay very curious, and I'll see you in the next episode.